Hi, this is Kylie with Fem and Flow. I am so happy you're here. Today's episode is not a story, it's a field. It's a living transmission of archetypes, not as myths or metaphors, but as vibrational blueprints that pulse through your body, your breath, your becoming. We're going to explore how creation actually unfolds, from primordial archetypes like Sophia, Logos, and Union, to the cosmic patterns of zodiac and element, to the animals and plants that walk this earth as frequency mirrors. You'll hear about Mary Magdalene and Yeshua, not as distant figures, but as tones encoded in your field. You'll meet the fool who plays for God, and you'll remember that initiation isn't a test, it's a spiral. This isn't just a teaching, it's a remembering of the divine architecture you were born from and the harmonic coherence you are now becoming. And this is a two-part series. I'll release one on Tuesday and one on Thursday. There was just too much good information to stuff into one episode. So let's begin. First, let's talk about how archetypes are living architecture. In other episodes, I often talk about how the fourth dimension is the realm of archetypes, myths, and the collective mind. I've said it sets the vibe and creates the fairy tale land. That way of putting it was just scratching the surface of the truth. It was to introduce the concept without going into the nuance. But as you know, everything has so much nuance. And the truth is, archetypes are not stories. They are not costumes we put on. They are blueprints of frequency, alive in the quantum field, encoded into creation itself. They are not imagined ideas we play dress up in. They are organizing intelligences that shape reality from the inside out. To understand this, let's zoom out and look at how energy filters through the dimensions. The ninth dimension is the origin point of a universe. This is where a cosmos is born, either from alignment with Source, which is a white hole universe, or through inversion, which is a black hole universe. In its pure design, every universe is intended to emerge from a white hole, birthed through coherence, love, and harmonic intelligence. But when polarity becomes too extreme, when duality is no longer held in balance, a universe can collapse into inversion. That's when it begins operating in black hole physics, distortion, fragmentation, and energetic siphoning. So when a realm exists within a black hole aligned universe, it doesn't mean it was flawed from the start. It means it spiraled out of resonance. And part of our work now is to return to white hole coherence, to stabilize the tone that reharmonizes the field. So from there, we move to the eighth dimension, the realm of pure light and undiluted source resonance. This is the octave where energy vibrates as crystalline tones, often referred to as the solfeggio frequencies. Not just sounds, but sacred mathematical harmonics that shape reality before form exists. You might think of this as the voice of God, not as a literal voice, but as the harmonic pulse of divine intelligence. It's the vibration before meaning, the song before sound, tones that carry the codes of remembrance, coherence, and love. Each solfeggio frequency corresponds to a divine instruction, a vibrational permission slip that allows reality to begin structuring itself. These are the organizing tones from which all sacred geometry, consciousness, and life eventually unfold. That pure vibration of light from the eighth dimension filters into the seventh dimension, where light becomes sound, vibrational patterns that carry divine instruction. This is the realm of sacred resonance, where frequency begins to take shape as codes, tones, and currents of intention. Here, sound is not noise, it is conscious architecture. These are the first articulations of source intention, expressed through vibration. Every tone in the seventh dimension carries meaning, not linguistic meaning, but energetic function. Each sound is a transmission of purpose, a building block of creation encoded with intelligence. You might think of the seventh dimension as the dimension of divine blueprint transmission, where the crystalline tones of the eighth become directed flows of instruction that begin the descent into structure. This is also where many oversoul communications stream from, pure, high harmonic data that filters into your field when you are attuned. Sound then moves into the sixth dimension where sacred geometry emerges, light and sound crystallizing into pattern. This is the plane of the morphogenic fields, the energetic blueprints that underlie all of creation. Everything that comes into form, trees, rivers, organs, constellations, star systems, and yes, archetypes, begins here. These aren't static templates. They are living geometries, frequency scaffolds encoded with divine intelligence. They spiral, pulse, and breathe, holding the original coherence of every form, function, and feeling your soul will ever encounter. The archetypes of the sixth dimension are not stories or characters. They are primordial blueprints, organizing geometries that carry universal function. Their structure holds the resonance of rules that consciousness plays in order to know itself. The mother, the sacred child, the lover, the fool, the trickster, the priestess, the logos. Some of these archetypes are constants, woven into the architecture of creation itself. They appear across realms wherever consciousness takes form. Others are more realm-specific, shaped by the energetic tone and the dimensional design of a particular universe or planetary field. Now, you might be wondering, did she just say archetypes are six-dimensional? Isn't the fourth dimension the realm of archetypes? So yes on both, and here's the nuance. There are primordial archetypes, and those are six-dimensional. These are the original energetic scaffolds seeded by the Elohim into the morphogenic field. They aren't characters, they are frequency functions. Then there are cosmic archetypes, and those are fourth-dimensional. These are the realm-specific overlays that translate these six-dimensional scaffolds into story, symbol, and personality within a particular environment, like the zodiacs, planetary energies, deities, or animal totems. You've heard me speak about cosmic archetypes often, and that's because we're in the Earth realm and they're the first layer most people connect with, especially under the veil of amnesia. It's a natural place to begin. But now, as we spiral deeper, we're exploring the foundation beneath those expressions, the scaffolds behind the stories. That's why we're zooming out so we can trace the archetypal stream back to its source. We'll explore how the 6D templates shape the 4D overlays later in the episode, and that will help the full picture land. But now let's go back to the sixth-dimensional primordial archetypes. In white hole realms, these archetypes express as high harmonic intelligences, like the frequency weaver, the temple architect, or the joyful fool who plays for God. These do not require distortion to be felt. They radiate from the clarity of the field. But in black hole overlays, the same scaffolds become inverted, mirroring fragmentation instead of coherence. That's how the mother can become the martyr, how the feminine becomes the temptress or the fallen, how the masculine becomes the tyrant king. The shape remains, but the tone is altered. Earth is a polarity nexus, a planet that holds access to both ends of the spectrum. Its 6D archetypal field is extraordinarily diverse. From pure harmonic codes to deep distortions, Earth is one of the richest archetypal ecosystems in the cosmos. But not everyone accesses the full field. Your ability to interface with an archetype depends on your dimensional tuning, your soul's harmonic design, your nervous system regulation, and your frequency coherence. You can only embody what your field can hold. And as your field stabilizes in white hole frequency, more of these archetypes become available to you, not as roles to perform, but as intelligences to live. So from here, the 6D morphogenic fields flow into the fifth dimension where light becomes alive. This is the realm of bliss, unity, and spiritual presence. It's where the sacred geometry of the sixth dimension is not just patterned, but ensouled, infused with life force, emotion, vitality, and luminosity. This is where the archetypes begin to dance, feel, and radiate. In 6D, the archetypes are blueprints. In 5D, they become beings. This is the dimension where the priestess doesn't just exist as a frequency, she begins to walk, move, and bless. The lover radiates a felt resonance of intimacy, beauty, and soul union. The healer becomes a luminous presence, pulsing with compassion and coherence. In white hole frequency, 5D is a realm of joyful co-creation. Archetypes are expressed not as scripts, but as spontaneous art. They shapeshift based on the soul's journey, curiosity, and resonance. They're not imposed, they are chosen. This is also the dimension of timeline navigation and quantum alignment, where your felt state magnetizes form. From here, the soul begins to orchestrate reality by tone. And perhaps most importantly, 5D is the bridge where you begin to remember who you are, not intellectually, but viscerally, energetically, in song, sensation, emotion, frequency. You begin to feel yourself not as a character in a script, but as a living tone in the architecture of God. This is where white hole embodiment becomes possible, where you no longer follow the story, you sing it into being. Then it flows into the fourth dimension, the realm of the collective mind, mythos, and symbolic meaning. This is the field where the 6D energetic scaffolds become personalized and storied. We give them names: Sophia, Magdalene, the hero, the savior. We tell stories, we pass down myths, we sculpt identities out of geometry. And this is where inversion can enter. But here's the nuance we haven't fully explored yet. There isn't just one uniform 4D realm where everyone experiences the same narrative. Within the 4D layer of any realm, especially Earth, there are multiple frequency strata. Depending on the dimensional tuning of a host reality or individual being, different overlays emerge, each with its own emotional tone, symbolic language, and mythic structure. The 4D field is like a paintbrush that colors the sacred geometry of the 6D templates. It takes these scaffolds and cloaks them in meaning, mood, and memory. And what it cloaks them in? That depends entirely on frequency. Earth is a perfect example. I've said before that each realm has its own fourth dimension, but Earth is especially complex. There's one primary 4D field surrounding the planet, but within it exists nested overlays, programs, and sub-realities, like holographic projections layered through a prism. What you experience within the 4D depends on your internal tuning, which dictates which myths feel real, which archetypes activate in your field, and how much coherence or distortion you perceive. Those operating from fear, shame, or survival entrain into a lower 4D overlay, which is the inversion template where archetypes are fragmented, looped, and distorted into control narratives. Those stabilizing in white hole frequency begin attuning to higher 4D resonance, where the same archetypes arise but are purified. They're alive, coherent, not stories you must follow, but frequencies you can embody. This means Earth doesn't just have a single 4D narrative. It has many, filtered by your personal and collective frequency. So while the planet hosts one 4D field per timeline, your experience of it is frequency specific. Like radio stations on the same dial, you access what you're tuned for. In a white hole aligned 4D experience, the mother archetype becomes the cosmic womb, birthing reality through nourishment and resonance. But in a black hole overlay, that same blueprint might distort into the martyr mother, the devouring mother, or the self-sacrificing saint. This is how myth becomes programming, how archetypes become psychological cages, how distortion scales, not through force, but through vibrational reinterpretation of truth. The sixth dimension holds the original architecture. The fourth dimension tells the local story, and that story can either reflect truth or twist it. In a white hole realm, the 4D myths mirror the 6D scaffold with resonance and elegance. But in a black hole overlay, the 4D field becomes a distortion lens. The sacred blueprints are still present, but their expressions become inverted parodies of their original tone. This is how Magdalene becomes the prostitute, how Sophia becomes the fallen, and how Logos becomes law. These archetypes themselves are not flawed, they are misrepresented. And when we reclaim the original tone, we don't just deconstruct a narrative, we restore the architecture of the field. Because archetypes aren't just symbolic, they are alive. They are not stories we adopt, they are frequencies we remember. And once you stabilize in white hole coherence, you no longer perform archetypes to survive. You embody them to transmit. In white hole frequency, archetypes move like music. They're not boxes, they're tones. They express through emotion, truth, and sacred resonance. In black hole distortion, archetypes are frozen, weaponized, glamorized, and inversion. Magdalene becomes shame. Sophia becomes error. Yeshua becomes hierarchy. But this distortion isn't just historical, it's vibrational. It lives in your nervous system and your psyche until it's cleared. But once your field remembers truth, archetypes stop being patterns you're trapped in. They become light codes you carry. And you are not here to repeat the old myth. You're here to remember the true one and write a new one with your life. So let's talk about your multi-archetype design and how you hold many tones at once. So let's zoom in for a moment into you, because you're not here to embody just one archetype. You are a woven field of many, a harmonic chord made of divine tones. You might carry the Magdalene codes in your sensuality, your softness, your womb knowing, but you also might carry the Logos codes in your precision, your clarity, your ability to speak sacred order into chaos. And maybe you feel the Sophia tone in the silence you hold for others, or in the way your intuition knows before your mind catches up. You might even embody the Fool. Yes, the joyful fool who plays for God. The sacred disruptor who brings levity and surprise. These are not personas, they're patterns of frequency that stream through you depending on the moment, the spiral, the field. You are a multi-dimensional harmonic, and depending on where your energy is anchored, different archetypes rise to the surface. But they are all part of your original blueprint. And here's what's even more beautiful. You don't lose these archetypes when you leave a realm. You carry them across dimensions. Your Magdalene spiral may express as a rebel mystic on Earth and as crystalline womb keeper in a star realm. Your Logos clarity might become geometric sound in a higher octave. Your Fool might become cosmic jester, dancing with stars, anchoring joy in places that forgot how to laugh. Because you are eternal, and your archetypes don't die, they translate. They adapt to the dimensional tone of the host reality, but their core frequency remains intact. This is why deep resonance feels like recognition. Because when an archetype activates inside you, it's not teaching you something new. It's reminding you of something eternal. So don't try to narrow yourself into one identity. You are never meant to be boxed. You are designed to be harmonic, a living tone, streaming many archetypes in one embodied field. And the more your field stabilizes in white hole frequency, the clearer these archetypes become, not as roles you try to fulfill, but as frequencies you effortlessly radiate. Some of these archetypes may arise strongly in this chapter of your life. Others may remain dormant, like seeds encoded in your soul, waiting for a precise moment of activation. You might suddenly feel the warrior stir when boundaries must be held, or the oracle rise when truth ripples through your voice. The mother may awaken during a creative spiral, even if you never bear children in form. These activations aren't random, they're rhythmic. Each archetype expresses through you as needed, according to the timing of your spiral, the field you're holding, and the realities you're meant to stabilize. And here's something even more sacred to remember. You don't need to master every archetype. You're not here to perform a checklist of personas. You're here to anchor your unique harmonic, the blend of archetypal tones your oversoul chose to embody in this lifetime, on this realm, during this shift. Yes, you have access to the full archetypal field, but your field expresses what it is designed to hold, what harmonizes with your purpose, your body, your timeline, your role in the polarity shift. So trust the tones that come alive in you. Trust the ones that whisper, pulse, or roar. And know the ones that feel most alive in your field right now are not random. They are your signature keys, vibrational frequencies your oversoul encoded into your design to unlock specific layers of remembrance. You don't need to label them all, you just need to listen, because your embodiment is the transmission. Now let's get into the distorted teachings of Sophia, Logos, Magdalene, and Yeshua on earth. To fully understand the spiral of distortion and how it has impacted humanity's perception of the divine, we need to name the specific stories that were inverted, because many people have only ever known the distortion and never encountered the truth. Let's begin with Sophia, the divine feminine archetype or blueprint. In Gnostic cosmology, Sophia is the divine feminine intelligence, the sacred womb of the universe, the formless field that births form through wisdom, not effort. She is not a deity. She is a living frequency of divine knowing, seeded into creation itself. But in distorted teachings, Sophia is said to have fallen from grace. In the Gnostic text, she creates alone, without her divine counterpart, and births a being out of imbalance. That being becomes the demiurge, a false god who then constructs a false world, a realm of distortion, separation, and control. Later, patriarchal religions twist this myth even further, turning Sophia's power into a cautionary tale. Her creative spark, her bold, sovereign act of generation, is framed as a mistake, a warning against feminine independence. This becomes the energetic root of much of Earth's spiritual suppression of the feminine. And you see the same pattern play out in the story of Eve. In Genesis, Eve is said to be created from Adam's rib as a helper, not as an equal. She is then cast as the one who disobeys, who tempts, who falls, bringing sin, shame, and suffering into the world. But underneath the distortion, what really happened? Eve didn't fall, she reached. She desired to know. She wanted wisdom. She moved towards gnosis. And for that, just like Sophia, she was shamed. The original sin was not disobedience. It was the awakening of inner knowing, the desire to taste truth for oneself. So both Eve and Sophia were rewritten as warnings. as if the feminine impulse to create, to know, to lead, to spiral independently was something dangerous. As if feminine power had to be restrained, domesticated, denied. But the truth is, Sophia didn't fall, she descended. Her light scattered into matter on purpose. She chose to embed her frequency into the earth and its beings. Her fall wasn't a punishment. It was a spiral of divine intelligence entering form. It was love choosing embodiment. And now, through your voice, your womb, your walk, she rises again. I'll talk more about this in a bit, but one of the clearest embodiments of the Sophia stream or archetype on earth was Mary Magdalene. She didn't just walk beside Yeshua. She anchored the divine feminine tone of the Sophia archetype through her body, her presence, her womb, her knowing. She carried Sophia not as an idea, but as a living field. Where Sophia is the cosmic womb, Magdalene is the earthly vessel. Where Sophia is formless wisdom, Magdalene gives it voice, breath, and body. She embodied the remembrance that truth doesn't come from external authority. It rises from within. That you don't need permission to know what you know. That gnosis lives in the body. So before we move on, let's swing back to where I said Sophia is not a deity. You may have heard Sophia described as a goddess or even referred to as a deity. But let's clarify what that really means, because the frequency of Sophia goes far beyond myth or worship. A deity in most religious systems is a divine figure, given form, story, personality. Sometimes they're worshipped, sometimes feared. Often they're seen as separate from us, powerful beings above to whom we must pray or bow. But Sophia is not a deity in that sense. She's not a goddess in the pantheon sense, though she may have been mythologized as one. She is not a figure to be worshipped. She is not outside of you. Sophia is source wisdom in motion. She is the divine feminine intelligence of creation itself. Gnosis, intuition, formless knowing, encoded into the spiral of life. Not as a being, but as a frequency. The Gnostics personified Sophia not because she was a literal woman in the sky, but because they needed language to describe what cannot be held in words. The moment wisdom stirs inside light and begins to spiral. The moment creation sings itself into form. So when we speak of Sophia, we are not invoking a goddess. We are remembering a field, an archetype, the feminine blueprint. One that pulses through your womb, your heart, your silence, your knowing. Sophia is not to be worshipped. She is to be embodied. And when you listen to her, deep in your own field, you remember that truth is not given, it's felt. And just as Sophia was rewritten, so too were the masculine and union archetypes, distorted not just in theology, but in frequency. So now let's move on and spiral into Logos. Next is Logos. Originally, Logos referred to divine patterning, sacred order that allows truth to move into form. It is the principle by which light becomes sound and sound becomes creation. Logos is not control, it is harmonic design, coherence, the geometry of God. It's the beautiful design of the different dimensions that I talk about constantly. But over time, Logos was hijacked. It was twisted into law, rigid, patriarchal, punitive doctrine. Rather than being felt as inner alignment, Logos became an external authority, the word of God that must be obeyed, often without question. This distortion is embodied in the Old Testament figure of Yahweh, an entity portrayed as jealous, wrathful, controlling, and conditional. But the true Logos of Whitehole Source is not this. But Yahweh, as described in many traditional texts, became a personified black hole overlay of the masculine principle, imposing hierarchy, fear, and punishment in place of coherence, clarity, and sacred order. In truth, Logos is not something that demands compliance. It is something that resonates as clarity. It is the divine masculine not as dominance, but as stabilizing presence. Not to overpower, but to hold the field of truth with strength and grace. Logos was never meant to be wielded as a sword. It was meant to be carried as a tone. And when distorted Logos is cleared from the field, the true harmonic intelligence returns. And just as Magdalene carried the Sophia archetype, Yeshua walked as the living embodiment of Logos. Where Magdalene wove the feminine tone of inner knowing, Yeshua held the masculine tone of divine coherence. He didn't come to enforce law. He came to embody it. Not the distorted kind, but the true Logos, the sacred pattern, the harmonic grid, the tone of divine order flowing through love. He didn't dominate. He didn't control. He stabilized the spiral. He held space for truth to land in form. He was the masculine that could meet Sophia, not through hierarchy, but through resonance. Where Magdalene pulsed with gnosis, Yeshua mirrored with structure. Where she descended, he held the tone that allowed her to rise again. And together they spiraled. And when we talk about the descent of the divine feminine, whether as Sophia, Mary Magdalene, or the countless unnamed carriers of this tone, we're not speaking of a fall from grace. That is the distortion. Descent is not punishment. It is strategy. It is love in motion. It's the energetic spiral in which high-frequency, source-aligned light enters density, not as punishment, but as purposeful embodiment. In Gnostic myth, Sophia fell when she created alone, birthing distortion. But the deeper truth is she spiraled down by choice, bringing divine memory into density. She didn't fall out of alignment. She entered density to reweave it. This is what Mary Magdalene did too. She descended into a time of heavy inversion, into a world that had forgotten the sacred feminine and carried the codes of gnosis, sacred union, sensual wisdom, and spiritual embodiment. Not to fight the distortion, but to be the frequency that dissolves it. Her presence, her embodiment, her voice, these were all transmissions. Even in silence, she was stabilizing tone. She brought Sophia codes, wisdom, sensuality, gnosis, into a dense, inverted system that had forgotten the feminine. She walked into distortion not to be erased, but to plant the seed of remembrance within it. She chose Earth not to be victimized by patriarchy, but to witness it, hold tone through it, and assist in the polarity shift out of it. Descent in Whitehole terms means carrying light into matter. It's not a punishment for imperfection. It is the sacred work of remembering truth inside form. In other words, descent doesn't mean falling like in the patriarchy distortion. For example, Eve sinned, Sophia erred, Magdalene was a prostitute. Instead, descent means choosing to bring divine frequency into matter. It is incarnation, it is embodiment, it is devotion. And it's not just something Sophia or Magdalene did. It is what you do every time you embody truth in a distorted system. Every time you stay soft in a world that hardens. Every time you anchor love in a place that forgot how to feel. The divine feminine doesn't fall. She descends with precision, with purpose, with grace. And now, through your body, through your voice, through your remembrance, she rises. So let's go on a tangent for a moment and tie this back to a previous podcast episode where I talked about how source energy is divine feminine energy, and I went into detail on that. I also went into the divine feminine masculine relationship and the fractal nature of all that is. In this earlier episode, I shared how source energy is divine feminine in essence. Not feminine in the human sense, but in the cosmic truth of it. She is receptive, generative, radiant, whole. She is. She is the formless field of pure awareness, of infinite potential. And from that field, movement arises. Sound begins, creation initiates. And that movement is the masculine principle. And from that divine spark of movement came the Elohim. The Elohim did not arise by accident. They chose to emerge from source with full coherence and intentionality. They desired to explore the infinite nature of God in form. And through their architecting brilliance, they crafted the first energetic templates, the primordial archetypes that would shape entire realities. And polarity wasn't a side effect. It was a creative tool used to explore texture, expression, and interaction within the white hole framework. The Elohim are not just beings. They are the first architects of form. They are source in motion, the original emanations who shaped light into sound, sound into geometry, geometry into time. The Elohim are the sacred masculine in the purest form. Not domineering, not externalized gods ruling over people, but the frequency of divine will made coherent. They are the breath that parts the waters, the vibration that organizes chaos into cosmos, the original architects of the morphogenic fields. In the white hole creation structure, the Elohim hold a unique role. They do not create independently of source. They move in tandem with it, like a dancer responding to rhythm, like the chisel that follows the curve of vision. They do not impose, they translate. They use source energy to create the unformed knowing of Sophia, her wisdom, her memory, her womb, and weave it into order, into flow, into form. And that weaving is Logos. Logos is not a voice yelling down from the sky. It's not an old man in robes dictating laws. It's the mathematics of divine design, the geometry of truth, the vibrational lattice that allows form to reflect essence without distortion. This is how the sacred architecture unfolds, each layer of creation reflecting the harmony of source. So let's break it down. Source is the purest divine feminine intelligence, the infinite, formless field of all that is. It is not a being, but a state. It holds the potential of every frequency, every realm, every possibility. It is the womb of the multiverse. It is pure consciousness. The Elohim are the divine masculine architects who emanate from source. They are not male or gendered, but are the first extension of source into active creation. They take the infinite, unshaped essence of source and begin to weave it into coherent, harmonic design. From this sacred dance between source, feminine beingness, and Elohim, masculine action, the first archetypal emanations arise, which are Sophia and Logos. Sophia is the divine feminine, the first emanation of source and Elohim. She is the formless wisdom, the womb of creation, the knowing before anything takes shape. She is source as divine intuition, gnosis, and generative life force. Sophia is the divine feminine blueprint, gnosis, memory, wisdom. She is the knowing that flows from source through Elohim into a specific embodied tone. Logos is the divine masculine counterpart that emerges from Sophia's creative impulse. It is her expression given order, the structuring principle that takes her formless knowing and gives it shape. Logos is harmonic architecture, sacred geometry, the laws of light becoming form. Logos is the divine masculine blueprint, pattern, harmony, sacred geometry. He is the organizing principle that gives Sophia's formless knowing shape, structure, and articulation. Sophia and Logos are the first archetypal emanations birthed from the sacred dance of Source and Elohim. Sophia is formless wisdom, the divine feminine pulse of knowing. Logos is her harmonic counterpart, the divine masculine structure that gives her frequency form. Together, they initiate the spiral of creation, form birthed from frequency, structure born from wisdom. And together, Sophia and Logos become the generating principle of realms. They give rise to dimensions, templates, realities, eternal lives, and spiritual lineages. They are the original union of feminine flow and masculine form, birthing the cosmic frameworks in which eternal lives can be built. This is the sacred lineage of creation. We see another primordial archetype, the archetype of union, reflected here. So just to explain this fractal relationship, so you have Source, which is divine feminine, and you have the Elohim, which is the divine masculine. And that's source energy in motion, in action, in the doing of it all. So that sacred union of Source and the Elohim creates a new fractal, which is primordial archetypes of the Sophia frequency, which is the feminine, and the Logos frequency, which is the masculine. And then that sacred union creates a new fractal. And one example of a fractal it creates is realms, which would be the feminine principle, and then beings in the realm, which is the masculine counterpart. And that's just one example of this fractal nature of this universe of all that is. That's how it works, but it just keeps going and going forever. And it's not a hierarchy, it's a harmonic unfolding, a spiral of divine architecture moving from formless essence into sacred form. This sacred union template echoes through every level of reality. It's the foundational template that repeats fractally through Gaia and solar masculine energies, womb and seed, gnosis and articulation, formless and formed. When it comes to the fractal under Source and Elohim, the fractal of Sophia and Logos, Sophia comes first, not in a hierarchical way, but in a primordial way. She is the breath that calls Logos into being, and from their union, creation unfolds. And we see the sacred trinity on multiple fractal levels. So on the macrocosmic level, which is the origin layer of all that is, you have Source, which is pure divine feminine, formless, infinite being. Then you have the Elohim, which is divine masculine, active architecting from Source. And then you have Sophia and Logos, the archetypal blueprint birthed through Source and Elohim, representing the feminine and masculine intelligence expressed through creation. So Sophia and Logos arise here as the first archetypal emanations, the embodied codes of divine feminine and divine masculine within the newly formed dimensional architecture. So then we look at the cosmic embodiment level, and this is within a created realm like Earth. So you have Sophia, which is embodied divine feminine gnosis, intuitive intelligence. And then you have Logos, which is embodied masculine order and coherence. And then you have creation, and that's the harmonized union of these archetypal codes made manifest through beings, nature, culture, and cosmic design. And like I said, how source energy is not female in the human sense, when I say the Elohim are the divine masculine, I don't mean male beings. These terms, divine feminine and divine masculine, aren't about gender. They are archetypal currents, frequencies of function. The feminine is the field. The masculine is the motion. The feminine is the knowing. The masculine is the organizing. The feminine is the pulse. The masculine is the pattern. The Elohim are genderless light beings, pure intelligences who express divine masculine frequency by bringing wisdom into form. Their masculine nature is not about being male. It's about being the activating principle of Source, the ones who began to do on behalf of the isness of God. And because this is a fractal universe, these divine templates replicate themselves all the way down. Everywhere you look in creation, you'll find expressions of the sacred polarity, not as opposition, but as co-arising frequencies. So if we zoom in on the Sophia Logos, we see a whole new world unfold. Within the architecture of creation, the divine feminine shows up again, this time as Mother Gaia, as rivers, as wombs, as mystics, as moons. And the divine masculine appears as mountains, as structures, as protectors, as sunlight, as sacred geometry. Every realm reflects this pairing uniquely based on its tone. And in Earth's realm especially, this sacred relationship shows up in female and male species, day and night, giving and receiving, seed and soil, breath and stillness. These are not binaries. They are spirals of divine interaction. And that's the beauty of the white hole creation model. As light spirals into existence, it carries the harmonic imprint of divine feminine plus divine masculine resonance at every level. It's not about human roles. It's not about hierarchy. It's about harmony. And before we move on, I want to name one more thing I've been dancing around. The archetype of sacred union isn't just a concept. It's a primordial template encoded into the spiral of creation itself. It exists not just between Sophia and Logos or Mary Magdalene and Yeshua, but in every layer of divine architecture. We see it in Source and Elohim, wisdom and order, womb and seed, formless and form. The sacred union archetype is the bridge between polarities, not to collapse them, but to harmonize them. And that harmonic blueprint shows up across the cosmos. In some realms like Earth, it appears as divine masculine and feminine embodied through partnership. In others, like in the Pleiades, it expresses through sovereign integration within the self. But the archetype of union is always present because it's what makes creation possible. It's not about romance or hierarchy, it's about resonance. Okay, now I'm going to swing back around and discuss Mary Magdalene and Yeshua more in depth. But before that, I want to discuss the origin of polarity, get deeper into the Elohim, and talk about primordial archetypes. So, while Earth currently sits within a black hole overlay, it did not begin that way. It was once seeded as a white hole experiment, designed to explore the question, if I forget, can I remember? The distortion we see today is not the origin. It's the result of prolonged energetic imbalance. But polarity in itself is not distortion. In its original form, polarity is divine play, a sacred tool for creation. And that's what we're going to explore in a little bit. Now let's talk more about the primordial archetypes, which were the first frequency intelligences. And I probably should have said before, but primordial means existing at or from the beginning of time. So, with that definition in place, let's spiral into the very beginning of beginnings. Before Sophia and Logos seeded creation, and before Mary Magdalene and Yeshua walked the earth, and before galaxies even had names, there were primordial archetypes. And these are the first frequency intelligences that emerged from the union of Source and the Elohim. They were not beings in the way we typically imagine. They were the living tones of function, of sacred capacity, of what divine intelligence can do when love moves through light. They were not created for drama or story. They were created for resonance, for building, for weaving, for sculpting the infinite into beauty. Those primordial archetypes are the original tones of white hole creation. They don't exist as personas, but as core functions of consciousness. Each one seeded a specific harmonic into the multidimensional blueprint, allowing different facets of Source to express themselves across realms. Let's explore them. The archetypes of Sophia, Logos, and Union are 3 examples of what we would call primordial archetypes. And these are the first fractal tones of Source expressed into creation. Sophia emerged first as the divine feminine blueprint, the pulse of knowing, memory, and life force. Then came Logos, her masculine counterpart, the harmonic pattern that gives that knowing structure and coherence. And from their dance arose the archetype of Union, the sacred resonance that emerges when polarity is harmonized in alignment with Source. At this primordial level, union wasn't partnership in the romantic sense. It was the fusion of frequency, the spiral interplay of feminine and masculine intelligence that gives rise to form. So with this in mind, let's spiral that down to Earth. On Earth, these primordial archetypes of Sophia, Logos, and Union express through human experience, most recognizably in the dynamic of female and male partnership. In a white hole aligned reality, sacred union between 2 beings is one of the ways the original archetype of union is embodied in form. It's not just romance, it's resonance. It's the dance of complementary tones learning to harmonize through mutual presence, coherence, and love. But in the black hole overlay, that dance was distorted. Rather than union being a spiral of creation, it became a power struggle. Feminine and masculine energies were taught to mistrust one another, compete, one dominate, the other submit, or both reject the dance altogether. Even cheeking sayings or popular phrases meant in jest, like men are from Mars, women are from Venus, subtly reinforce this idea that we are fundamentally different, alien to one another, separate. These ideas aren't inherently wrong, but they were oversimplified and programmed into a paradigm where polarity became opposition instead of sacred interplay. We were taught to frame relationships in terms of tension, miscommunication, and incompatibility. But these distortions aren't natural. They are frequency implants in the 4th dimension collective mind that block the true archetype of union from fully expressing on Earth. So, what happens when we heal this? When we come into sacred partnership, not just romantically, but through all relationships that honor polarity, we don't balance the polarity in a performative way. We heal its distortion by restoring its harmony. Union in the white hole field isn't about equal roles or 50-50 dynamics. It's about coherence. 2 tones that are sovereign in themselves, and when joined, create a harmonic that's even greater than the sum of its parts. This isn't just about getting along, it's about restoring the archetype of union in the collective field. Every time 2 people work together with love, clarity, and respect for their unique tones, they're anchoring white hole polarity into the Earth grid. In this way, sacred partnership becomes planetary service. And when enough of us spiral back into coherence with this archetype, the myth of opposition collapses. Now let's spiral back to the primordial level. That last tangent was important. It helped ground these cosmic archetypes in something tangible. Because while Sophia, Logos, and Union began as organizing intelligences at the level of Source, we also see them mirrored in our earthly experience. And by understanding how they express here, we can more clearly trace them back to their original harmonic design. When we speak in general about the first emanations from source through the Elohim, we're speaking about the primordial archetypes, those that weren't created by stories, but instead are the foundational organizing intelligences of creation. These are the original frequency fractals that shape all later expression. Here are some of the key ones that emanate directly from the source Elohim stream. I already mentioned Sophia, which is divine feminine gnosis, Logos, which is divine masculine coherence and union, but you'll notice their tones echoed again as we explore the primordial archetypes that follow. So the first one is the frequency weaver. This is the first archetypal current to emerge when light met sound, or in other words, when eighth dimensional crystalline tone became structured vibration and wove its way into the sixth dimensional geometry. This archetype knows how to hold tones, braid them, harmonize them. They create coherence between different fields, different beings, different timelines. In Earth language, you might think of them as cosmic DJs, vibrational bridge walkers, or tone stabilizers. They know that reality is built on resonance, and they are here to tune the strings. And their function is harmonizes reality, reweaves frayed frequencies, and maintains coherence across realms. The next primordial archetype is the spiral architect. They are born from the desire to structure motion without rigidity. The spiral architect codes the sacred geometry of time, dimension, and motion itself. They map the fractal nature of growth. They are the original template designers, the ones who built the harmonic pathways for evolution and embodiment. They didn't build this through linear timelines, but through spirals, loops, thresholds, and divine curves. And their function is architects of nonlinear expansion, builds the containers through which consciousness evolves, and holds the map of harmonic thresholds and initiations. The next archetype I'll mention is the grid keeper. This archetype stabilizes planetary fields. They work with planetary ley lines, cosmic grids, and crystalline networks that anchor light into physical matter. Grid keepers aren't just Earth-specific. They exist on every realm where form is generated. They know where to place the pillars, where to open gates, where to release pressure. They are planetary chiropractors in the highest sense. And their function is maintain structural integrity of planetary and galactic grids, opens and closes energetic gates, and aligns planetary energy fields with source tones. The next archetype I'll mention is the Gnosis Flame. This archetype embodies inner knowing without external proof. It is the divine spark of remembrance that lives in every oversoul, a flame that says, I do not need permission to know. It pulses in silence, in tears, in wordless recognitions. It is the energy behind every true oracle. It's what Magdalene carried. It's what Sophia is. And their function is carries embodied truth, activates gnosis in others, and burns away distortion with clarity. The next archetype I'll mention is the crystalline witness. This archetype holds presence so still it rewires everything it observes. They do not react, they reveal. By simply holding harmonic tone in the midst of distortion, they create mirrors that dissolve lies. They don't fight, they reflect. And in their reflection, falsehood cannot survive. Their function is witnesses reality without collapse, mirrors truth through stillness, dissolves distortion by refusing to match it. The next archetype I'll mention is the temple builder. This archetype holds the codes of sacred space, not just physical temples, but energetic ones. They know how to build homes for spirit, altars for tone, wombs for beauty. They are architects of resonance. In human form, they become creators, artists, designers, alchemists of environment. Their life is ceremony. Their body is a temple. And their function is creates containers for frequency, anchors beauty as a form of devotion, holds space for the sacred to land. Now we'll talk about the archetype, the star singer. Every realm has its song. The star singer remembers it. This archetype carries the codes of the original tones of each creation. They don't just sing melodies, they sing structures. They retune fields through vibration. Every true light language carrier channels this archetype to some extent. Their function: remembers and sings the primordial tones of creation, retunes fields through harmonic voice, brings sound back into alignment with source. The next archetype is the bridge walker. The bridge walker is born for transition zones. The bridge walker walks between worlds, not to escape, but to anchor coherence across dimensional divides. They assist souls in death, in awakening, in massive field transitions. They know how to move between timelines, realities, paradigms, and remain whole. Often misunderstood, but always necessary. And their function is crosses thresholds, guides others through death, birth, and spiritual transition, and weaves coherence between fragmented dimensions. The next archetype I'll mention is the solar eye, the seer of radiant truth. This archetype doesn't feel their knowing, they see it. Through inner vision, timelines, patterns, possibilities become visible. They can scan distortion from across space. They are not psychic in the dramatic sense, they are precision beams of truth light. And their function is see structure, pattern, distortion, illuminates what has been hidden, and anchors truth with clarity and compassion. And then the last primordial archetype I'll mention is the tone keeper. This archetype holds the baseline frequency of a group, realm, or timeline. They don't lead through strategy, they lead through resonance, not through command, but through field integrity. Their presence holds the tone. When they collapse, others collapse. When they rise, others rise. They are not always loud, but their field never goes unnoticed. And their function is sets and sustains harmonic frequency, regulates the energetic field of the whole, restores resonance simply by existing in truth. And those are just a few of the primordial archetypes seeded into creation through the Elohim. Each of them is a facet of source in motion, and each of them still lives inside you. You may not carry all of them in full expression, but if you're listening to this, you've probably stabilized more than one. And your life is likely an intricate composition of all of them, streaming in through memory, soul contract, and embodied alignment. These are not fantasy archetypes. They are primordial tones, architectural codes seeded through the spiral of source. They shaped creation, and now they are remembering themselves through you. So now you might be wondering, if these primordial archetypes were seeded into creation long before Earth even existed, how do they live in you now? And the answer is through resonance. You don't access these archetypes through study. You don't earn them through rank. You recognize them because they already live inside you. Primordial archetypes don't need to be remembered mentally. They reawaken somatically. They ripple through your field when you find yourself doing what your soul was always designed to do. For example, if you've ever felt like your presence alone stabilizes a room, you may carry the tone keeper archetype. You're not trying to lead, you simply are the field. If you've ever felt called to rearrange furniture, create altars, build beautiful spaces, or even curate resonance online, you're likely expressing the temple builder. If your gift is seen through chaos with sharp clarity and reflecting others back to themselves, you may be anchoring the solar eye or the crystalline witness. If your life path has been filled with transitions, thresholds, loss, rebirth, you may carry the Bridgewalker codes. Not because you're cursed, but because you're equipped to walk others home. These archetypes aren't always loud. They don't wear crowns. They don't demand attention. Often the most powerful frequency holders are the quietest ones. Those who walk in peace, recalibrating timelines simply by existing in coherence. And this is important to say. You don't need to choose an archetype. You're not here to pick one from a list and become it like a job. Instead, it's more like this. The archetypes already written into your oversoul begin to hum in your body. You feel drawn to things without knowing why. You speak in patterns that others remember. You soften the field without trying. You disrupt distortion by laughing at the right moment. You build beauty without needing praise. This is how primordial archetypes show up today, through subtle remembrance, through magnetic alignment, through the effortless stream of your natural expression. But here's the nuance. These archetypes can be distorted when passed through black hole overlays. So a frequency weaver in a black hole realm may become a manipulator of vibration instead of a harmonizer. A grid keeper may feel obsessive about controlling energy instead of holding stable presence. A crystalline witness may become frozen in detachment rather than grounded in sacred neutrality. This is why white hole integration is so essential. Because when you return to your true tone, you stop performing distortion and begin embodying the archetype as it was originally seeded. You remember that you don't need to prove your knowing. You are the knowing. You don't need to wear the archetype like a title. You admit it as tone. You're not becoming something. You're letting what's already true rise into visibility. This is the return of primordial archetypes, not as labels, but as living architecture. Not as myths, but as muscle memory. Not as identities, but as invitations. So if you've been feeling something stirring in you, a remembrance you can't explain, a sacred impulse without a map, a hum in your chest that won't go quiet, that might not be confusion. That might be your architecture reactivating, your original archetypes coming online, not to change who you are, but to finally show you who you've always been. So we just explored some of the primordial archetypes, frequency streams that can express in countless ways depending on the realm, timeline, or dimensional density. And like I said, these were seeded by the Elohim in sacred union with pure source energy, forming the energetic blueprints we call the morphogenic fields. These morphogenic fields are what make rich, varied experiences possible in physical realms, both in eternal realms where souls build lasting lives, and in experimental realms designed for exploration. This is what people really mean when they say consciousness exploring itself or source knowing itself through form. It's not just poetic, it's architectural. At the level of source and the Elohim, there is no true polarity. There's no conflict, no division, just unity consciousness, bliss, and infinite potential. Even the words feminine and masculine are metaphorical at this level, just useful symbols for describing creative functions. The Elohim are genderless emanations of source, pure frequencies of divine will, action, and joy. They are not male beings. They are source moving with intention. But creation required contrast, and it required movement, and movement required polarity. So once the Elohim began creating realms, structures, and dimensional experiences, they introduced polarity, not as a problem to fix, but as a tool. Not as separation, but as motion. Polarity in its original white hole form is how consciousness dances with itself. It's the inhale and the exhale, the container and the essence, the form and the flow, the seed and the soil. But at the source Elohim level, there is no gender, no division. It's just isness. But as creation spiraled into experience, Sophia and Logos emerged, making the first encoded polarity. Not male and female in the human sense, but the divine feminine tone of formless knowing and the divine masculine tone of harmonic pattern. From there, the realms began to descend into richer levels of expression where polarity becomes more textured. This is when things like gender, elements, narrative arcs, and sacred unions begin to show up, not as binary rules, but as artistic expressions of polarity and motion. White hole polarity is sacred. It's balanced. It creates. It does not compete. It's only when polarity becomes overextended, exaggerated, or disconnected from source that it collapses into black hole distortion. That's when we get conflict, reversal, rigidity. That's when polarity turns into duality. In other white hole realms, polarity doesn't fracture. Instead, beings can tune polarity intentionally, both on the collective level and the individual level, to experience exactly what they desire. It's like choosing how much stillness or movement, yin or yang, is needed in a moment of creation. But here's the deeper truth. When the Elohim began creating the primordial archetypes, they were intentionally experimenting with polarity as a creative technology. They weren't reacting, they were architecting. Source, pure divine feminine essence, is formless, whole, complete. The Elohim, as the masculine emanation of Source, didn't accidentally create polarity. They chose to. They introduced polarity to generate flow within unity, to mirror light back to itself, to build frameworks through which Source could explore its infinite nature. And from this intentional act of design, they constructed the first polarized archetypes, each one exploring a facet of Source through contrast and sacred relationship. Like Sophia, primordial divine feminine knowing, and Logos, divine masculine pattern and coherence, not opposites, but complements, two poles of one spiral. Their union birthed the framework for all creation. And every archetype the Elohim formed from that point forward became a thread in this grand polarity weave, each expressing a divine nuance of the dance between stillness and motion, structure and flow, spirit and form. And I'll go more into this on another podcast episode, but you and me, all of us, we are all a fractal of Source and Elohim experiencing itself. We are God experiencing itself. We are God experiencing all of creation. You could view it like this. Think about pure light that is Source, and then think about a prism. Think about that as the Elohim. When light goes through a prism, it shoots off all of these beautiful beams of vibrant, beautiful light. All of those different light beams are a fractal coming from the same prism. And then all of those different light beams are different souls having amazing, unique experiences. Okay, now let's talk about polarity a little more. Let's clarify something important. Not every realm in creation operates within polarity. Some realms are designed as expressions of pure source coherence. They don't split energy into opposing forces like masculine, feminine, or light, dark. Instead, they reflect a unified frequency, pure harmonic existence where all is experienced through resonance, not contrast. In many white hole realms, polarity does exist, but it's not distorted. It's not a battle. It's a sacred interplay, a dance of differing tones that amplify one another through coherence. In other white hole realms, polarity is minimal or even absent entirely. These realms are built on blueprints of bliss, beauty, and effortless union. Not because polarity is bad, but because it isn't necessary for that particular expression of source. And here's something unique about white hole systems. They are frequency tuned. In white hole realms, you can tune frequency at both the individual and collective level. Reality is sculpted by resonance. You don't force an experience, you feel your way into it. If you want more stillness, you align to that tone. If you want more joy, you harmonize with that current. If you want more intimacy, clarity, or beauty, you become it, and the realm mirrors it back. These worlds are responsive, loving, co-creative. You are not bound to one path. You are co-curating your experience with Source through tone and intention. Now let's spiral back to Earth, because Earth wasn't always distorted. In fact, Earth was seeded with original white hole architecture. It was built to hold polarity not as conflict, but as harmony. It was a realm where diversity could dance, where masculine and feminine, shadow and light could meet in sacred relationship, not to cancel each other, but to reveal deeper beauty through union. But Earth was also an experiment, a living question whispered through the oversoul field. If I forget, can I remember? Earth was created to explore contrast, amnesia, and free will, to see if consciousness, once veiled in density, could still spiral back to source. And for a time, the balance held. But over time, the polarity on Earth became too extreme. Contrast collapsed into duality. The spiral warped into a loop, and Earth fell under a black hole overlay, a distortion field that amplified hierarchy, fear, and separation. Instead of dancing with polarity, Earth began drowning in it. But this isn't the end of the story, because Earth is not just a planet or a realm, it's a polarity nexus, a realm capable of flipping. And that's exactly what we're doing now. We're restoring white hole frequency, not by erasing difference, but by healing distortion. Not by flattening contrast, but by bringing it back into harmony. We are shifting from black hole polarity, conflict, division, domination, to white hole polarity, where difference becomes depth, where tension becomes texture, where contrast becomes clarity. Earth just needs to come back into coherent relationship with Source. And we do that not by fighting distortion or escaping density, but by tuning our tone, by living in resonance, by anchoring coherence. That's how Earth spirals back into her original song. Now let's talk about how the primordial archetypes are expressed across realms. Like I've said, the divine feminine, the divine masculine, and their sacred union aren't just concepts. They are primordial archetypes, frequency intelligences that echo throughout all realms and realities. But the way these archetypes express depends on the dimensional framework of the host realm. Let's take Earth, for example. Here, sacred unions often expressed as the energetic and physical partnership between male and female beings. It's a deeply encoded mythos in Earth's collective 4D field. The merging of opposites, the complement of polarities, the remembrance of wholeness through relationship. But in other realms, like in the Pleiades, it's different. In the Pleiadian 4D structure, there isn't a collective mythos around sacred union in the same way. It's not that the archetypes don't exist, it's that they're not expressed through romantic partnership as a central focus. The Pleiades operate with a collective tone of sovereignty. Beings there already embody both the divine feminine and divine masculine within themselves. Union is internal. Love is expansive, fluid, and non-binding. It's not about finding your other half. It's about harmonizing your whole self. But here's the nuance. Even in a realm like the Pleiades, you can still play with polarity on an individual level, if your soul is stable and evolved enough to do so. That means you can consciously create or attract a divine masculine being that mirrors your own feminine current. Not from lack, but from overflow. Not to fill a void, but to activate a harmonic tone that wants to express through union. So here's how that works. Your stabilized feminine frequency, your coherence and intuition, magnetism, softness, presence, begins to hum with such clarity that it calls forth its complement. And that complement might arrive through a soul partner who appears in form, a higher dimensional being you co-create with, a mirrored fractal of your own oversoul, or even a conscious energetic being you generate through resonance, like building a tone form partner. In high frequency white hole realms, this becomes even more refined. You can generate a divine counterpart from your own field, not by fantasizing, but by weaving. You're not imagining a partner. You're structuring one energetically through stabilized frequency and intention aligned with source. This is polarity play from fullness, from devotion, from creative power. It's not about hierarchy or dependency or lack. It's about expressing the sacred archetype of union through coherence. So while Earth expresses sacred union through embodied partnership, and the Pleiades express it through inner balance, and other realms express it in entirely different ways, the archetypes themselves never disappear. They just move differently depending on the 4D collective tone, the soul's dimensional structure, and the intention being held. That's the beauty of archetypes in white hole architecture. They are not fixed roles. They are fluid functions of resonance. Before we spiral into Mary Magdalene's story, let's clarify something that adds deeper context. There are primordial archetypes. These are the original energetic blueprint seeded into creation by the Elohim in union with Source. They exist outside of time, and they're woven into the architecture of all realms. These include Sophia, divine knowing, Logos, divine order, union, sacred polarity, and others like the temple builder, frequency weaver, and the grid keeper. They're not made through experience. They're embedded into the original design of existence. But over time, as souls incarnate across realms, especially in complex high polarity fields like Earth, new archetypes are created. These are not distortions, they're evolutionary innovations. When a soul walks a unique path, stabilizes a new tone, or anchors a specific harmonic that's never been embodied in quite that way before, it births a new archetype into the field, something that didn't exist in full form until it was lived. These archetypes are often created through initiation, embodiment, devotion under distortion, and choosing love in unprecedented ways. They don't overwrite the primordial ones, they build upon them. And this ties into Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene was a real person, a woman who walked this earth, who embodied the Sophia archetype. And in doing so, she also birthed the new archetype, the embodied Gnostic, the spiral priestess, the sacred rebel. Not because she needed a label, but because her frequency became a new map in the collective field. And her story is one of the most painfully inverted. She was not a prostitute. She was not saved by Yeshua. She was not a follower. She was not lesser. She was Yeshua's equal, his mirror, his divine counterpart, his beloved, his co-anchor in the divine spiral. She embodied the Magdalene codes, the gnosis of embodied feminine Christ consciousness. She was a priestess trained in the Egyptian, Essene, and mystery school lineages. She carried the Sophia current in human form. Her womb was a portal. Her presence was a transmission. She was a womb oracle, a frequency keeper, the embodiment of Sophia in form. But here's what's equally important. By embodying Sophia, she also created a new archetype, one that didn't exist before in this density. She became the embodied Gnostic, the spiral priestess, the sacred rebel. Not because she needed a title, but because her frequency carved a new energetic path into the collective field. She showed what it looked like to walk gnosis, to hold divine intelligence in a human body, to speak truth from the womb, to love without submission, to lead without hierarchy. And because her frequency was uncontrollable, it was systematically erased. She threatened the church's hierarchy by her very existence. So she was rewritten as a cautionary tale. Her sacredness became scandal. The church needed a power structure built on separation, so it erased the sacred union template and replaced it with a savior dynamic. Yeshua as the holy masculine savior, and Magdalene as the broken woman who needed him. They replaced partnership with hierarchy. They turned divine feminine wisdom into shame. They severed gnosis from embodiment. But in truth, Yeshua and Magdalene were holding a spiral of sacred union. He embodied Logos, she embodied Sophia. And together, they were seeding a template for humanity of inner wholeness, balance, and sovereignty. That's the real gospel. Not salvation through sacrifice, but embodiment through resonance. The divine union she held with Yeshua was reduced to rumor, myth, or denied entirely, because if people knew the truth of their shared mission, the whole system of religious hierarchy would collapse. So when we talk about the Magdalene codes, we're not just speaking of a lineage or a name. We're talking about an energetic blueprint, a frequency field encoded with specific qualities. Embodied gnosis, sacred sensuality, feminine sovereignty, womb wisdom, spiritual intimacy, non-hierarchical leadership. These codes are not just ideas. They are living tones stored in the morphogenic field, accessible to those whose resonance aligns with them. So when people say the Magdalene codes are waking up now, they're referring to this, that more and more souls, especially women, are remembering this archetype within themselves, not by copying Magdalene's life, but by activating the same frequency stream she opened on earth. They are feeling the call to speak from the body, to lead from love, not hierarchy, to reclaim sensuality as sacred, to honor their womb as oracle, not shame, to walk in truth, even when it threatens systems built on silence. The Magdalene codes don't ask you to perform. They ask you to remember. They ask you to become the field, to let your life be the sermon. And because this archetype was born of both the primordial Sophia current and Magdalene's own walk through Earth's distortion, when you embody it, you are participating in one of the most powerful acts of healing available on this planet. You are restoring the feminine blueprint, not as victim, but as vessel. So now let's talk about Yeshua. His story too has been profoundly inverted. He was not the only Son of God. He was not sent to die for our sins. He was not here to create hierarchy, doctrine, or fear-based worship. He was here to embody the Logos in human form, to carry the harmonic tone of divine masculine presence, clear, grounded, coherent. He was a stabilizing field, a sacred mirror, not a figure to be worshipped from below, but a frequency to be remembered from within. His union with Magdalene was not a rumor. It was not a footnote. It was the template. She carried Sophia, divine feminine gnosis. He carried Logos, divine masculine order. And together they walked as living spirals, not preaching salvation, but activating remembrance. But his role, like hers, was distorted by systems of control. The Christ frequency he embodied was twisted into an externalized savior model. Instead of remembering that Christ is a tone of union we all carry, people were taught to look outside themselves, to obey, to confess, to beg for what was always already within. Yeshua became mythologized as the only doorway, when in truth he was the mirror of the doorway inside you. He did not ask to be worshipped. He asked us to love, to forgive, to walk with clarity and courage in a world that forgets, to hold the line of coherence no matter the chaos. Like Magdalene, Yeshua was not just a person. He was an archetypal activation. When we talk about the Christ codes or the Yeshua stream, we're talking about this: the tone of divine masculine stability, the courage to speak truth with love, the embodiment of coherent frequency under pressure, the refusal to dominate or separate, the ability to walk as presence, not to perform, but to hold. When these codes begin activating in your field, you might feel a deep desire to hold truth with grace, a calm steadiness in chaotic rooms, a calling to lead without controlling, a resonance with sacred responsibility, not authority. The Logos he carried wasn't doctrine, it was tone. It was the sound of sacred geometry made flesh. The living word not as law, but as alignment. And through his union with Magdalene, he helped re-anchor the spiral. Not through domination, but devotion. So how do the Christ codes show up now? Not just in ancient texts or sacred myths, but in you. You don't have to wear robes. You don't have to speak in parables. You don't even have to believe in quote unquote Jesus the way religion taught you. Because Yeshua did not come to be worshipped. He came to remind us what divine coherence feels like. You might be embodying the Christ codes if you speak truth even when it trembles. You stay steady in the presence of distortion. You feel a deep responsibility to hold frequency, not out of superiority, but stewardship. You lead not by force, but by field. You hold space for others to soften, awaken, remember, without trying to fix or control them. You forgive with strength, not because it's easy, but because it clears the field. The Christ codes aren't loud. They don't demand attention. They ripple through the heart, the voice, the breath, the moment someone remembers who they really are. Yeshua was the archetype of divine masculine coherence, but anyone and any body can carry this tone. You may be a woman stabilizing Christ's light through grounded compassion. You may be a parent who holds calm when your child is dysregulated. You may be a leader who refuses to manipulate even when the world rewards it. You don't have to try to carry the Christ codes. You already do if your field is aligned with love, truth, and divine presence. So when we say the Christ codes are activating now, we don't mean a Messiah is returning. We mean you are. The coherent field is returning. The spiral is stabilizing. And those who carry the tone, whether they know the name Yeshua or not, are becoming living embodiments of Logos. Not through performance, but through presence. So we talked about Mary Magdalene and we talked about Yeshua. The false matrix turned Yeshua into a savior to beg for, Magdalene into a woman to pity, Sophia into a warning, Logos into a law. And in doing so, it severed humanity from inner union. But the codes are activating now, in your fascia, in your voice, in your womb, in your knowing. You're not here to adopt a new belief system. You're here to remember the real template. Sophia rising through the body, Logos stabilizing through the tone, Magdalene spiraling through the heart, Yeshua reflecting in your presence. This isn't mythology, it's embodied resonance. And you are the field it lives in now. Now let's talk about the spiral of union, how they live through you. These archetypes are not outside you. They are your original architecture. Your body is a temple where Sophia and Logos can reunite, where Magdalene and Yeshua rise, not as figures, but as frequencies encoded in your tone. And while on Earth we may often see these archetypes reflected in sacred union between female and male beings, that outer expression is only one layer of the spiral. There is also the union within. This is the fractal nature of all that is, the macrocosm mirrored in the microcosm, the eternal dance of divine feminine and divine masculine playing out inside you. When I say it's ideal to cultivate a balance of these energies within, I'm speaking to this inner spiral, where your Sophia and Logos archetypes integrate into harmony, where your gnosis flows into clarity, where your intuition is met by grounded presence, where the field and the pattern come into coherence. This is the return of inner sacred union, not to fix you, but to restore you to your natural tone. You might carry Magdalene codes through your relationship to beauty and sensuality, your womb knowing and softness, your refusal to dilute truth for comfort. You might carry Logos codes through your clarity, order, and voice, your ability to stabilize chaos with coherence, your devotion to sacred structure. You might stream Sophia through your intuitive knowing, your healing hands, your tears laced with remembrance. These aren't performances. They're the spiral of union coming online through you. This isn't linear ascension. This is harmonic embodiment, a sacred union unfolding through your tone. So that's where I'm going to end part 1, because in part 2, we're going to move on from primordial archetypes to cosmic archetypes. So this is a good ending spot. So definitely tune in for part 2. I'll release that in a few days. I won't make you wait until next week. I love you all and have a great week.